Hello, good evening. Welcome to Novara Live. My name is, of course, Bastani. Tonight, I have the immeasurable pleasure of being joined by Dr. Mike Bankole. Mike, how are we?
Yeah, not too bad, thanks, Aaron. It's another day for the B team back in action. Some big news stories coming up, so looking forward to kind of breaking them all down with you, Aaron. Should be good.
I'm looking forward to it too. And my goodness, we have had a jam-packed day. Too many stories. Of course, tonight we're leading with Israel's ground incursion into Lebanon. But later in the show, we'll also be discussing the far right's victory in the Austrian election and the latest from Tory party conference. In the early hours of this morning, Israeli forces began a ground offensive in Lebanon. It marks a major escalation in the offensive against Hezbollah and is the first time the IDF has engaged in ground operations in the country since 2006. The invasion, which Israel describes as limited, follows weeks of airstrikes and special operations by Israel against Hezbollah. Those operations included exploding pagers, which left hundreds injured and several dozen dead last Friday, as well as an airstrike that killed longtime Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah, as well as several dozen others. Here's IDF spokesperson Daniel Hagari announcing the ground operation earlier today.
The Israel Defense Forces is conducting limited and targeted raids along Israel's northern border against the threat Hezbollah poses to civilians in northern Israel. These localized ground raids will target Hezbollah strongholds that threaten Israeli towns, kibbutzim, and communities along our border. Hezbollah turned Lebanese villages next to Israeli villages into military bases, all ready for an attack on Israel. Hezbollah had prepared to use those villages as staging grounds for an October 7th-style invasion into Israeli homes. Hezbollah planned to invade Israel, attack Israeli communities, and massacre innocent men, women, and children. They called this plan Conquer the Galilee. Hezbollah is the world's largest non-state army, and southern Lebanon is swarming with Hezbollah terrorists and weapons. If the state of Lebanon and the world can't push Hezbollah away from our border, we have no choice but to do it ourselves. I want to make it clear. Our war is with Hezbollah, not with the people of Lebanon.
Our war is with Hezbollah, not the people of Lebanon. That sounds awfully similar to the kind of statement you would have heard a year ago. Our war is with Hamas, not the people of Gaza. Of course, we all know what happened next. More than 40,000 people have been killed in Gaza in the last 12 months, maybe many, many more than that. And the Gaza Health Ministry has said over 16,000 of those killed are children. So if you're Lebanese, it's hardly reassuring to hear those words from Hagari. Are 16,000 dead children in Lebanon also going to be viewed as reasonable collateral damage for the Israeli government? Indeed, before the IDF set one foot inside Lebanon, the country's health ministry had already announced that over 1,000 people have been killed in the country over the past 2 weeks, with nearly a quarter of them being women and children. For now, it's unclear how long Israel's operation will last, although it's clear Israel has been preparing for this moment for months. Of course, until today, Israel's actions outside Gaza and the West Bank had broadly been limited to airstrikes. This map from the Times shows the most recent strikes. As you can see, Israel has targets right across southern Lebanon, but also the port city of Sidon and southern Beirut. And it was, of course, in Beirut that Hassan Nasrallah was killed last week, along with 33 others. Airstrikes in the last 48 hours haven't just been limited to Lebanon, however. Israel has also targeted Hodeidah and Ras Isa on the west coast of Yemen, both of which are almost 3,000 kilometers away from Beirut. Meanwhile, another airstrike allegedly killed 3 in Damascus and wounded 9 others. That is according to the Syrian state agency Sana, which claims the strike took place in the Meza district in western Damascus. Among those killed was Syrian TV anchor Safar Ahmed. Ahmed originally hailed from Homs and joined the state broadcaster Syria TV in 2002. She hosted several talk shows and programs, including a flagship breakfast show Sabah al-Khair. In response to the invasion, the British government has now chartered a plane to take British nationals in Lebanon out of the country. Meanwhile, US officials say Netanyahu was talked down from a larger incursion, and they don't seem particularly positive regarding the actions of Tel Aviv. This from the New York Times quotes Secretary of State Antony Blinken. The question is not, does Israel have a right to deal with existential threats to its security and enemies across its borders with the avowed intent to destroy Israel? Of course it does, Secretary of State Antony Blinken told reporters at a news conference on Friday in New York. The question is, what is the best way to achieve its objectives? Mr. Blinken said diplomacy was a better choice than force, but Mr. Netanyahu showed little interest in negotiated solutions during his visit. His UN address did not even mention a US-led plan unveiled on Wednesday that calls for an immediate 21-day ceasefire to pause months of fighting between Israel and Hezbollah. Nor did Mr. Netanyahu meet with Mr. Blinken in New York. Not everyone in the US government agrees, however, because Politico reports that multiple senior officials within the White House encouraged a ground invasion of Lebanon. Here's that story. Senior White House figures privately told Israel the US would support its decision to ramp up military pressure against Hezbollah, even as the Biden administration publicly urged the Israeli government in recent weeks to curtail its strikes, according to American and Israeli officials. Presidential advisor Amos Hochstein and Brett McGurk, the White House coordinator for the Middle East, told top Israeli officials in recent weeks that the US agreed with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's broad strategy to shift Israel's military focus to the north against Hezbollah in order to convince the group to engage in diplomatic talks to end the conflict, the officials told Politico. Not everyone in the administration was on board with Israel's shift. Despite support inside the White House, the official said the decision to focus on Hezbollah sparked division within the US government, drawing opposition from people inside the Pentagon, State Department, and intelligence community, who believed Israel's move against the Iran-backed militia could drag American forces into yet another Middle East conflict. No shit, Sherlock. Pretty obvious what's going on there, but it is remarkable that progressives in the United States were told in 2020 to vote for Biden to stop the lunatics taking over the asylum and being in control of, amongst other things, US foreign policy. It's hard to see Donald Trump being any worse than effectively egging on Israel to invade Lebanon in order to gain leverage in peace talks. You have to invade them to get leverage for peace talks. Meanwhile, as recently as yesterday, France's Foreign Affairs Minister, Jean-Noël Barrot, urged Israel to hold back. Mr. Barrot told journalists while visiting the country, "I urge Israel to refrain from any ground incursion and to cease fire. I call on Hezbollah to do the same and to refrain from any action likely to lead to regional destabilization." That was yesterday. So the French and the Americans are, at best, ambivalent about today's events. The reason being they know it would likely lead to a wider escalation. And that has arrived quickly, with the United States claiming this afternoon that Iran was preparing its response. That was earlier. That has happened, by the way. More on that in a moment. Here's the FT reporting on those US briefings. Iran preparing to launch missile attack against Israel, says US official. The FT goes on to say this. The United States has indications that Iran is preparing to imminently launch a ballistic missile attack against Israel. The US official said, "We are actively supporting defensive preparations to defend Israel against this attack. A direct military attack from Iran against Israel will carry severe consequences for Iran." Strange that an invasion of Lebanon by Israel is fine, it's hunky-dory, but Iran attacking Israel, that's severe. We have to do something. It also adds that the US Embassy in Jerusalem has ordered all of its employees to seek shelter in place. And of course, in the last hour, as you may have seen, the IDF say that missiles have now been launched from Iran into Israel. It's being reported over 100 have been launched. And Al Jazeera report a direct hit on Tel Aviv. Others are claiming similar in Haifa. Jerusalem seems broadly a different story. Of course, Israel has world-class anti-missile defense systems. In April, Iran fired more than 300 missiles, drones and loitering munitions at Israel. after a suspected Israeli strike hit its embassy compound in Damascus, killing several senior Revolutionary Guard commanders. But that barrage, unlike today, was very clearly telegraphed and was intended to be symbolic. It caused limited damage since Israel's air defenses, as I've said, are supported by the US, the UK, and France, all of who helped to effectively intercept most of the projectiles before they reached Israeli air space. They were helped, of course, by the Jordanians too. Israel responded with a missile attack at that time on an airbase near Esfahan, but the exchange was contained in April, with neither side wanting a further escalation. Given the intensity of Israel's actions in recent weeks, however, a second round between the two countries, as is now beginning to unfold, seems liable to be far more intense and likely to escalate. Mike, just moments before we came on air, there were extraordinary images of ballistic missiles flying over Israel. It seems to be, right now, of course, these remain to be verified, Tel Aviv almost certainly has been hit by at least several of those missiles, Haifa maybe as well. Extraordinary images, like I say, moments before we came on air. Are we now seeing, unlike in April, which was broadly symbolic, like I say, telegraphed, tit for tat, are we seeing something different here? Is this a profound shift now to a major regional war?
It certainly appears that way. And I think, look, this is something that has escalated in the last kind of couple of days. And, you know, when I think about how we got to this point, I do think that the international community more broadly needs to think about how it could have de-escalated this situation, how it could have tackled Israeli aggression, extremism in a far more kind of profound way. Because what's happened is our leaders, and I say our leaders in the UK, both major parties, have essentially endorsed the violence and extremism of the Israeli government, have done very little to kind of stop the Israeli government's genocide on Gaza. And now we're in a position now where this has gone from kind of bombardments of Gaza to a kind of essentially almost a full-scale regional crisis and regional kind of war. And what's going to happen is innocent civilians are going to die. Women and children especially going to be hit quite hard. And we know that there are gendered effects of war. So women are going to be hit quite hard by this. So this is a disastrous situation. And if we truly care about peace and we want regional stability, what our government should be doing and the noises our government should be making beyond the kind of, citizens come back to the UK through Lebanon and the kind of posturing we've seen from some members of our government, there needs to be a kind of an end to arms sales to Israel, because in many ways, our support of Israel, our kind of failure to strongly combat Israel's aggression and violence has led to this becoming a full-scale invasion where we're seeing Lebanon being invaded and we're now seeing so many different parties involved in this. So yeah, this has all the hallmarks of a really worrying situation.
There's also breaking news from Tel Aviv, with at least 10 injured in a mass shooting. It seems that some people have also been killed. Sky News reporting explosions at the same time being heard within the city. Of course, that will be developing over the course of this show. We might be coming back to it. There's no evidence as yet that those two events are coordinated, what might be styled as a terror attack and a conventional attack from Iran into Israeli airspace. We now have a statement from the Iranian mission to the UN, the United Nations. They've said this: Iran's legal, rational, and legitimate response to the terrorist acts of the Zionist regime, which involve targeting Iranian nationals and interests and infringing upon the national sovereignty of the Islamic Republic of Iran, has been duly carried out. Should the Zionist regime dare to respond or commit further acts of malevolence, a subsequent and crushing response will ensue. Regional states and the Zionist supporters are advised to part ways with the regime. Look, my initial thoughts reading that are Iran is really on the ropes. I mean, it might be a strange thing to hear when they've just basically sent hundreds of projectiles raining down on Israeli cities. But Iran is really on the ropes, and its strategy of proxies has come up against really hard boundaries in recent weeks. Of course, Nasrallah, as we spoke about at the top of the show, was killed last week. And this does feel like talk, because realistically, Iran can't escalate beyond what we're seeing right now. It doesn't have nuclear weapons. Like I say, its proxies are struggling. What it does have is ballistic missiles, and it can send those towards Israel. That's what it's done. So the idea that it can escalate further is hard to believe. I mean, maybe it does have several nuclear weapons we're not familiar with. That's perfectly plausible. But it doesn't have a nuclear program on a par with Israel. So that would also be highly irrational to use one or two dirty bombs or whatever when Israel has a well-documented nuclear stockpile. This does feel like saber rattling from Iran in order to save face. And I say that as somebody wholly critical of Israel's actions, reprehensible, illegal actions in recent weeks and days, and particularly today. Lebanon is a sovereign country. But this is gasping, I feel, from Iran. I'd love to know your thoughts as well out there. Get involved in the super chat, and of course, let me know on X. I should also say this before we go on to the next story. In April, Iran sent around 300 ballistic missiles, loitering munitions, drones over to Israel. Several hundred, maybe several only hit their targets. Most of them were brought down. And they were brought down, as I've already said, with assistance from France, the US, the UK, the Jordanians. You can agree or disagree with that, right? But what I would say is, given that today Israel invaded Lebanon, Iran has then done this in response to the invasion of Lebanon. If there are Iranian ballistic missiles being shot down by the Royal Air Force, then we are tacitly defending Israel's invasion of Lebanon, in my view. I'm not saying legally. I have no idea about the legal sort of relationship here. But we are tacitly, because we're effectively saying Israel can invade Lebanon, they can commit airstrikes in Syria and in Yemen, besides what they're doing in the Gaza Strip and West Bank, and nobody can hit them. They can hit multiple places, multiple sovereign countries, by the way, but nobody can hit them. And I think that's a really serious intervention by the Royal Air Force. And I personally don't think that has the legitimacy of consent from the people of this country. Why is the British taxpayer paying for the security of Israel so that it can commit invasions into other countries? You know, Israel is a member of the United Nations, and as a result, it is meant to seek peaceful means to settle disputes using the UN. It has not done that. And the fact that, like I say, we're enabling that behavior as a member of the UN Security Council, I think demands real questions, frankly. I think it's not good enough. And Britain's doing it because the Americans are doing it. But the Americans are also governed by a demented man who doesn't know what time it is or what day of the week it is. And I would submit that a democratic country of 68 million people, which is what the UK is, deserves better. Just a few of your points. We've got a super chat from Dean Robertson. £10 super chat. Thanks, Dean. Dean says, Iran has hypersonic missiles which can defeat the Iron Dome. They don't have nuclear weapons, but would Israel go that far? So 2 things. Firstly, Iron Dome is not used with regards to ballistic missiles. Iron Dome is with regards to short-range and medium-range missiles. They have a separate system for ballistic missiles. Hypersonic missiles are basically, obviously, a missile that can travel faster than the speed of sound. There are different kinds of hypersonic missiles. There is a kind of hypersonic missile that right now only the Russians and the Chinese have, which is effectively, it travels faster than the speed of sound, but it can move, right? It can be guided in real time, which is, of course, incredible. The US doesn't have that kind of technology, as far as we know. It doesn't publicly claim to have that technology. The UK doesn't have that technology. And Iran's hypersonic missiles, as far as I understand, aren't that kind of technology. Of course, given their close relationship with Russia, they may have access to them. They may have, access to them soon. But they're not there yet. And in terms of nuclear weapons, look, Israel will be very loath to use nuclear weapons. Of course it would. But if it perceives an existential challenge coming to it, if there's one country on earth that's going to use nuclear weapons, it's Israel, right? Which makes it all the stranger when you think about it, that's the country that we default to in terms of support in the West. We have an update. Close to 200 missiles have been fired from Iran at Israel, according to reports. The order to launch hundreds of missiles at Israel was made by Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, the Reuters news agency has been told. An official said Tehran is fully ready for any retaliation. Joe Biden has ordered US military to shoot down Iranian missiles. The White House has said Biden is monitoring the attack. I'm sure he is, if he can open his eyes and stay awake. From the Situation Room in the White House, alongside his VP, Kamala Harris. An update on that Tel Aviv shooting. That's really, really horrific to see some of those images. Israeli police are saying at least 4 people have been killed. Israeli media, however, is putting that figure at 8. And police have also said that the 2 attackers have been neutralized. We can now go to some of the scenes over Israel. This is allegedly some of the projectiles over Israel. As you can see, many of them landing. That is allegedly from today. These are not scenes from April, of course. Very few of those projectiles actually hit their targets in April. So this looks qualitatively different. Iran gave far less warning. This is another one. Possibly the same images from a different angle. Iran did give far less warning. And, you know, it was possibly more difficult for the US, the UK to scramble jets, etc. As I said a moment ago, the update from Biden was the US military was ordered to shoot down Iranian missiles and that they were monitoring the attack. Did they have advance warning of that? Well, to some extent, yes, because they briefed as much to various outlets, including the Financial Times. Did they know the extent of it, the targets? We don't know. Michael, come quickly to you. The UK is embroiled in this because Israel has invaded Lebanon. This is really key. We're not in the world where they're dealing with a non-state actor. Israel has invaded Lebanon. Another state has retaliated for that. And the UK and US and maybe even France potentially is involved in the defense of France. This does feel sort of World War I vibes in so much as X attacks Y, ABC, you know, all the way over there, they get involved. You know, it's Serbia, Austria-Hungary, and all of a sudden France and the UK and Russia and you know, all these other countries in Europe get involved in 1914. Do you think we need a public debate in this country now about whether or not Britain should be involved in enabling an invasion of a sovereign country, i.e. Lebanon by Israel?
Absolutely. And I think this is what we've been warning about for so many months, right? So many people have been warning about and raising concerns about Israel's genocide in Gaza. And it's just this general extremism. We've been warning about the fact that this could spill over. This could become a much bigger conflict. And we are involved in this conflict, whether we like it or not, because we have a strong relationship with Israel, which involves selling Israel arms, right? Which is pretty damn important when it comes to war, right? So I think we can't afford to just look at this as a foreign policy issue. It has like kind of nothing to do with us, and we'll try and hope for peace and, you know, call for a ceasefire every now and then. No. This has now become a big issue where Israel has invaded a sovereign nation. A sovereign nation, guys. This is not a joke anymore. It was never a joke, but now it's escalating beyond, you know, in a really kind of dramatic way now. So there does need to be a debate about this. And I think so many of us have been making noises about, you know, we need to stop selling arms to Israel. And this is what we've been kind of raising concerns about. So yeah, this has gone beyond the idea that we can just kind of have vague calls for ceasefire, have vague calls for peace, have vague calls for both sides need to do X and all of this sort of stuff. No, there needs to be kind of a concrete policy. How can the Labour justify selling arms to a nation that has invaded another sovereign nation, which is now caused retaliation from Iran, right? How can we justify being involved in this? So there is no justification, I don't think, and I think there needs to be a debate. And I do. The problem I have with kind of a debate, though, well, I do think there does need to be one. Is I just think that because we've decided just to kind of say and to hold this position quite strongly and quite firmly for the last 11 months or so, or 12 months now, approaching 12 months, that Israel has the right to defend itself, etc. I don't see how that debate's going to be carried out in good faith. Like, I don't see how. Like, people on the left who've been calling and have been raising concerns about this very escalation have been framed as, you know, Islamist lovers and, you know, our claims of genocide have been dismissed and being like, you're going over the top, you know, where's the evidence of this, etc. So I actually welcome a debate and think it's really important we have discussions about this because we are involved in this. But I also do, when I think about it now, and the thought kind of came to me as I was speaking in mid-flow there, how would this debate be conducted? Because I've been so irked by so many of the conversations about kind of Israel's violence and genocide for the past kind of 11 months or so, which kind of missed the entire broader context and kind of frame Israel's acting in good faith. Like, the debates for the last 11 months have been terrible, so I don't imagine that debates on this issue, as it's escalated even further, will be much better.
Yeah, I think that's true. Look, we've had a debate for years actually in this country, haven't we? In the last election, you had the Tories and Labour both saying that defence spending should go to 2.5% of GDP. By the way, going from 2 to 2.5% is about 10 billion a year. 10 billion a year more should be spent on defence. Why? What? So we can scramble jets to get involved in a conflict between Israel and Iran. Is that why the British taxpayer should pay more for defence? While we have aircraft carriers in this country which don't work, while we have homeless veterans. But don't worry, we can spend money on F-35s being scrambled to help Israel invade Lebanon. Does that make sense to anyone? It doesn't make sense to me. Why would the British taxpayer be subsidising a war, an intervention by Israel in a foreign country? Why would we do that? By the way, nobody remotely sane thinks that's sensible. Hence, they have to call the people protesting against Israel's actions hateful, anti-Semitic. They have to do that. Because if they keep the debate, the conversation at the level of facts, objectivity, reason, they got nothing. We have another super chat here before I go on to the next story. Jake with a £5 super chat. Aaron delivering a sobering, impassioned but objective monologue about the actions of these states is a reason to be pleased we have independent media. That's very kind of you to say. Look, at Novara Media, we believe that changing media, shifting media is the first step to changing politics. Our strapline years ago was new media for different politics. If you want a different kind of politics in Britain, across the West, the English-speaking world, and dare I say it, the world, then you know what to do. Go to novaramedia.com/support. The link is in the description below. Like I say, if you want to help us be a larger organization, reach more people, get a different kind of account out there to what is often the case in legacy media, water carriers for the establishment and effectively government policy, right? Whatever the government does, it's okay, particularly on foreign policy. Then you know what to do. Like I say, the link is in the description below. Help us build a new media for different politics. And it's not just our daily shows, it's our interviews on Downstream, it's our podcasts, our articles. We could not exist without your support. So if you think we're worthwhile, if you think changing the media is really important, because I do, I really do, that's why I've been doing this for 14 years, then go to that link in the description below. On the Novara Live hashtag, Turn Left Media says, Iran has been sending CRBMs and armed drones to Russia for some time now. Particularly the latter could make a hot war quite complicated for Israel, as Iran has presumably seen their effectiveness on both sides in Ukraine. What do you think? Yeah, look, I think there's so many dimensions to this, of course, because the UK and the US are funding, many others, of course, as well, are funding the Ukrainian side. And I think Russia clearly has a big vested interest in sending very effective military technology to the likes of the Houthis, Iran, etc. So I think your point about a hot war is very real. You know, we are not seeing World War III, but we're seeing a world at war. There's a regional war in West Asia. There's a regional war in Europe's near abroad, in Ukraine. Ukraine is, of course, in Europe. Russia is Eurasian. And those two things are certainly connected. And just to repeat, today, well, in the last 24 hours, Israel has had airstrikes in 2 locations in Yemen, 3,000 miles away from Beirut. They've invaded Lebanon. And they've also had an airstrike in Damascus. So that's 3 different countries, right? That is not Gaza on the West Bank. That's 3 different countries. That is a region at war. And like I say, I think we need a conversation in this country as to why the British taxpayer is effectively subsidizing that. We do have another update. Israeli military spokesperson Daniel Hagari, yes, him again, said in a televised address that the IDF is, quote, fully prepared to defend and retaliate to the Iranian attack and in a, quote, timely manner. He also said, quote, "We are on a high alert, both defensively and offensively. We will defend the citizens of the State of Israel. This attack will have consequences. We have plans, and we will operate at the pace and time we decide." I suspect that is. Also, another update, Israelis are free to leave shelters. No word on potential casualties. From what we've seen, as you saw with those videos earlier on in today's show, there seem to have been significant numbers of Iranian munitions hitting Israel. Where, how, and with what consequences remain to be seen. A far-right party has won Austria's general election for the first time since the Second World War. The Freedom Party has emerged victorious with just over 29% of the vote. Here's their leader, Herbert Kickl, delivering his victory speech.
And you don't need to worry, this 29% is well invested. It's an excellent investment for the Freedom Party because one thing has happened today. We have actually opened this door. We have opened the door to a new era. We are now really going to write this new chapter in Austrian history together.
Austria has certainly opened a door to the far right, and arguably even fascism too. After all, not only was the Freedom Party founded in 1956 by former SS officers, specifically Officer Anton Reinhaller, but just 2 days before the vote, some of its candidates were caught at a funeral where attendees sang a Nazi song. The Sunday's election saw the governing People's Party, or OVP, lose nearly a third of its seats with just over 26% of the vote. Meanwhile, support for the Greens, which is currently power sharing with the People's Party, fell to just 8%. And the opposition's Social Democrats got 21% in their worst result ever. Turnout was high, at 77% of the electorate, and the Freedom Party's anti-migrant platform seemed to chime with a sizable chunk of the Austrian electorate. The party's election programme is called, quote, Fortress Austria, a nod to its aim of suspending the right to asylum and deporting, quote, uninvited foreigners in a process of so-called remigration. The Freedom Party is also calling for an end to sanctions against Russia and is sceptical of continued Western aid to Ukraine. Its campaign was also characterised by COVID conspiracy theories, anti-LGBTQ sentiment, and climate denial. However, the far-right party's result isn't sufficient for it to form a government by itself, and it may struggle to form a coalition. Here's BBC News.
Mr. Kickl, the leader of the Freedom Party, is a very divisive figure, and all of the other parties who will be in the next parliament have said they don't want to form a coalition government that is led by Mr. Kickl. The Conservatives have suggested they could be open to an alliance with the Freedom Party, but not with Mr. Kickl. Mr. Kickl, though, so far has said very strongly that he wants to be the next Chancellor of Austria. He wants to be, in his words, a Volkskanzler, a people's Chancellor. And that's a phrase that worries some Austrians because it was used to describe Adolf Hitler in the 1930s.
Mike, I mean, that's pretty interesting, isn't it? Because, of course, the People's Chancellor, in a British context, people were saying about John McDonnell. And I personally don't like this idea that because a policy is adopted by the far right, that automatically makes it bad. So, for instance, Marine Le Pen might say, I want public ownership of industry. Therefore, the left-wing position is to oppose public ownership of industry. I think that's stupid. Equally, I like the idea of a People's Chancellor. However, clearly in the context of Austria, that's quite a significant statement, isn't it?
I think it is, and I think when we talk about the people, there is a clear definition of who the people are in the context of Austria. In certainly for this far right party, the people are, in a kind of, to be blunt, kind of what they would say is people who aren't immigrants, people who look like us, people who are like us. And I think when it comes to the rise of the far right, and this is being framed as like a victory for the far right, and the far right are doing so well. I mean, they haven't won enough votes to kind of form government, or certainly majority governments. And there's going to be difficulty to form a coalition because they're such a corrosive party. But I think when it comes to the rise of the far right across Europe, and we have seen it, whether it's France or AfD in Germany and Hungary, obviously we have Viktor Orban in power still. You know, this is all about the mainstreaming of these far right ideas by mainstream actors and mainstream parties. Even in Austria, the kind of Conservative Party tried to co-opt some of the rhetoric and language used by the far right party. And often what happens is, politicians, rather than challenging firmly the ideas raised by far-right actors, what they do is they try and, adopt some of these ideas, use some of their language. You've seen it in the UK. You've seen the language of, maybe UKIP and reform being used by some of our politicians. Starmer's starting point when immigration's a problem. Immigration's a problem we need to deal with in Britain, right? The starting point for the Conservative Party is we need to stop the boats, we need to stop immigration as a problem. So this adopting of far-right rhetoric and if the far-right say immigration's a problem, rather than challenging them, what we say is actually, no, you have a point, you are right, immigration's a problem. So we're seeing that trend happen across Europe, and what needs to happen is we need brave politicians, rather than pandering to the far right and being worried about the far right taking some of its votes. What these parties need to do is intellectually and compellingly take apart the ideas being raised by these far right actors, because the only way you can defeat the far right isn't by becoming the far right, it's by sincerely tackling them. So I have concerns, for example, with Starmer going off to meet Maloney a couple of weeks ago to talk immigration policy. Because again, she's a far-right actor. We shouldn't be engaging with these actors in ways that endorse their ideas. Why on earth is Starmer seeking kind of advice on immigration policy and discussing immigration policy with someone who's kind of espoused such extreme views on immigration? And the Albania policy being used by Italy, by the way, is completely unworkable and a waste of time. So we need to be serious here. We need to be serious about firmly challenging these ideas. Otherwise, what's going to happen is it'll happen in waves where maybe the far right again kind of lurch out of power, out of kind of popularity in inverted commas. Then there'll be kind of another wave, because these ideas are never ever challenged. They always linger in the background and then it comes to the fore every now and then. So I do think there is a real challenge for parties, mainstream parties, to firmly challenge these ideas.
Another figure on the European far right posing a serious challenge to centrist parties and politicians is, of course, Marine Le Pen. That is, if she can stay out of trouble. The National Front leader is currently standing trial along with 26 other people, including her own father, Jean-Marie Le Pen. Here's France 24 explaining the precise nature of those charges.
Embezzling public funds, European funds. It all goes back to 2004 when the National Front at the time had this great electoral success in the European Parliament. They had several MEPs and they had struggles in France here nationally because they didn't have enough money. They were growing more popular, but they didn't have the necessary funds to work, and they wanted to stay in the green. So they found this scheme of using the funds they were allowed to use in the European Parliament, but instead of using them to pay for your parliamentary assistance, well, they used these people in Paris to do work for the party, to be a bodyguard for the party's leader at the time, to be personal assistants, to be a graphic designer. And today in court, we saw these people coming to the witness stand and being told what the charges are. And this gives us a bit of a scope of what will happen in the next 2 months. And basically what they face, the charges they face, well, it goes from fines, also imprisonment, and what's really important for the party and for Marine Le Pen is the fact that they may lose their possibility to run for elections. They may be ineligible.
Now that's significant because Marine Le Pen is the frontrunner in France's next presidential election. She's presently polling around 40% in terms of people's preferences with regards to the first round of voting. Quickly, with regards to what you were saying, Mike, it's really interesting. People have talked about the rise of the far right for so long. And it does feel that, it's plodding in places like Germany, France, but in Italy, in the Netherlands, now in Austria, we're seeing things on fast forward. My worry is when you look at Starmer talking to Maloney about her policy of sending asylum seekers to Albania. My big worry is actually the parties of the centre-right, the centre-left, imitating these guys rather than them actually getting into power. It's fair to say that the new Labour government has had a challenging first 100 days. 6 in 10 Brits say they don't trust Keir Starmer, and Rishi Sunak even polled ahead of the Prime Minister a week ago. Worse still, a recent poll by the think tank More in Common found that more voters now prefer Rishi Sunak's Tory government to Keir Starmer's Labour one. Yes, really. I say first 100 days, it's not even been that long. It's actually 89 days and counting. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. There's still 11 days to go after all. But things are now going from bad to worse for Labour, with business confidence in freefall ahead of the autumn budget at the end of this month. The Telegraph reports this. Confidence among business leaders has drained away in advance of the autumn budget as they weigh up the prospect of higher taxes and stricter employment regulations. The Institute of Directors' Economic Confidence Index, which measures business leaders' optimism about the economic climate, registered a decline from -12 in August to -38 in September. The index also recorded a slide in directors' investment intentions, which have steadily fallen over the summer, from +36 in July to +23 in August, down to -6 in September. Meanwhile, private sector businesses have indicated that they expect no change in activity levels over the next 3 months, according to the Confederation of British Industry's latest growth indicator. The index has recorded positive growth expectations for 7 consecutive months, but Alpesh Palea, interim deputy chief economist at the CBI, said the outlook for the rest of the year had, quote, deteriorated. So, according to the IOD, the Institute of Directors, business leaders' optimism fell 26 points in 1 month. Meanwhile, investment intentions have fallen, wait for it, 42 points since July. Now, I can almost hear you screaming through the screen, maybe into your phone, or maybe you're listening, just talking to yourself, saying, Aaron, why have you become a capitalist running dog? And are you just looking for things to attack Keir Starmer with? Well, firstly, I haven't, and secondly, no. Because despite the Telegraph's write-up, it's clear that investment confidence fell in August, and that came after Labour won the election. And of course, anyway, Labour forming a government this summer had already been priced in by anyone remotely sensible for months, maybe even years. So what we're really looking at, and another explanation for the significant fall in confidence, is far more interesting. Namely that Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves have been so downbeat about the economy and so utterly miserable about Britain that it's had a substantial knock-on on how business leaders see things going over the next 12 months. And that's underscored by this separate piece in the Times. Business confidence falls to 3-month low. That is in relation to the latest Lloyd's Business Barometer findings, which concluded business confidence was at a 3-month low. The survey, which was conducted between September 2nd and September 16th, found that confidence fell by 3 percentage points to 47%. So, not as bad as the IOD, but falling nevertheless. But here's the important bit. That dip came after an optimistic period for businesses, with the tracker reaching 50%, its highest level since November 2015, in July and August. In other words, the new government was, initially at least, a cause for optimism among businesses. Confidence was rising. But then, in the last month, it started to wane. I wonder why. Could it be that Messrs. Starmer and Reeves have said the UK is a basket case for several months, while at the same time claiming they don't really have the power to do very much about anything? Please invest here. After all, the country's screwed. If only we could change things. We only won more MPs than Margaret Thatcher ever managed. Indeed, the possibility of this fall in business confidence was predicted by certain Labour figures more than a month ago. We know that because there was a Guardian report that was published at the end of August. One senior minister said the electorate, having put their faith in Labour improving their lot, would expect to see results soon or would punish the party at the ballot box. We don't have as long as number 10 thinks. That's prophetic, isn't it? Wow, that's Nostradamus. If people aren't feeling things are better in the next couple of years, that's a big problem, they said. Others were concerned that Starmer's downbeat approach could depress consumer and business confidence to the extent that it undermines his own strategy for getting the country back on track. Economic growth. I think we have another graphic. Yeah. The miserableism is completely self-defeating, warned one MP. We need to be bigging Britain up. It feels like we're doing the opposite. But Downing Street insiders brushed aside MP's jitters. They need to get over it, said one source. The public is sick of boosterism. Boris Johnson overpromising and under-delivering is a big factor in why people have lost faith in politics. They need to get over it. We know what we're doing. After all, we're now less popular than the Sunak government, and it's only been 3 months. Mike, This is a really interesting one because for me, for so long, Labour looked really competent in opposition. I don't think they had a great general election campaign. You know, they polled 45 at the start in April. They ended up getting 33. But in that 18-month period before the general election, they looked very professional. You know, you don't have to agree with their policies to see that they were really serious about power. What on earth has happened since they've entered office? Because since July, everything about them has been the complete opposite.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Would I use the word competent in opposition? I'm not sure I would. I think there was a clear path to kind of victory for them, and they kind of like played that game as they thought was best, and you know, had their message, which was about competence, and you know, we aren't the Tories. You know, we're going to look after the economy. All about jazz. Obviously, I fundamentally disagree with kind of where they took things in opposition and where they've taken things now that they're in power. I don't think there's. So I think my issue with where Labour are is there's a fine line. There is a balance between overpromising like Boris Johnson did and saying, "Hey guys, you voted for change. Guess what? Things are going to be absolutely terrible now that we're in power." Like there is a balance between those two things, and what Labour should be doing, rather than saying, "Hey, things are going to be rubbish now. We're in power. You all voted for this, by the way." What they could say is, "Hey, you know, we inherited a difficult situation, and you know, progress will take some time, but we're on the pathway to progress." Because what people voted for wasn't the kind of slow, incremental progress. People want change now because ultimately, where the kind of public sectors are, public sector services are, and everything else, things are in dire conditions, and things need to change drastically because lives are at stake, right? So this isn't the idea that we can just kind of like tell everyone things are going to be rubbish and kind of just tonally say that and not really do much else. There needs to be some kind of drastic action. So I felt Labour in opposition like kind of lacked vision, and I think we're seeing that in office now because of essentially what they're saying now they're in office is, you know, things are going to be screwed and we're in power, but things are going to be screwed, and that's kind of lines up with the idea they haven't got this kind of clear vision for me. I always use my friends as a kind of barometer over this. And I get it, if the opposition are less in the limelight than the government of the day. But when Labour are in opposition, I ask my friends, you know, who kind of are vaguely interested in politics, so know who Keir Starmer is, etc., kind of know what's going on, etc. You'd ask them, like, what do you think Keir Starmer's Labour stand for? And they would genuinely be a bit puzzled, like, you know, I'm not really sure, you know, he doesn't really say much. And that was a strategy by the kind of Labour in opposition to kind of not say too much, to kind of have a dividing line, be competent, and you know, we're going to look after your money. That was the clear dividing line. So it is no surprise when they get into power, they're like, what do we do? So I actually think this is an extension of what we've seen when they were in opposition. The kind of lack of clarity, the lack of inspiration in many ways as well. Again, it wasn't the general election result wasn't this kind of like, we love Labour, we're going to vote for Labour. It was in many ways a rejection of 14 years of conservatism, a rejection of 14 years of the Conservative government. So I think that Labour, if they want to kind of hold on to what's been described as the Peter Crouch majority, because it's quite thin but quite wide, if they want to hold on to that majority, they're going to have to do a lot better than just tell everyone we're screwed for the next 4 years. There needs to be some meat on the bones. There needs to be some ambition. There needs to be a tonal shift where people are inspired and invigorated, because we certainly need it as a nation.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably a little bit of disagreement between us. I mean, I agree on the vision part, but my goodness, I mean, again, I'll throw it over to the people watching and listening. It feels like basically for the last 3 months, Labour haven't had a communication strategy. The Labour right, I mean, look, I don't agree with lots of what they did, but that was the faction of Alistair Campbell and Peter Mandelson. What's happening? A Tory leadership contender, Robert Jenrick, is being lambasted by his fellow candidates. It started after he released this video about why Britain should leave the European Convention on Human Rights.
Our special forces are killing rather than capturing terrorists because our lawyers tell us that if they're caught, the European Court will set them free.
That seems like the sort of claim you should be able to back up. Here's Jenrick being quizzed about his comments on the Today programme.
Where are our special forces carrying out such killings?
Well, good morning. The point I was making is one that the former Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, has made, which is that our human rights apparatus, including the ECHR, is encroaching on the battlefield. And it is impacting the decisions that our generals and military decision makers are taking. as to what kind of action is required in these difficult situations. And I think that's putting an unnecessary and unfair burden upon them when they should be taking the right decisions for our safety as a country and for military personnel.
I just want to explain that he was quoted in the Telegraph about the circumstances in which he said we are more often than not forced into taking lethal action. He did say in that he was not suggesting we should scrap the European Convention on Human Rights. But you did say our special forces are killing rather than capturing terrorists. So you think or know that's happening now?
Well, Ben Wallace, as you rightly quote, said that there are...
This is about what you say. You said yesterday our special forces are killing rather than capturing terrorists.
Yes, the point that I was making, very much like our former Defence Secretary was making, is that as a result of the constraints imposed upon our armed forces by the ECHR,
we are killing rather than capturing terrorists. Do you know this has happened or this is happening now? Because you stated it in very bold terms in that video.
Well, the point that Ben Wallace was making, if I may just elaborate, was that there are instances where the ECHR is forcing or leading the decision makers to take lethal action. You could have said that in your video. For example, by calling in. If I may just finish the point, because it's an important one.
But this is what you said
by calling in a drone strike.
You reduced that to a very specific and stark phrase. You said our special forces are killing rather than capturing terrorists.
Michelle,
I just want to be clear. I think those were your words in that video.
I think
Do you know that is happening?
This is a very serious and stark situation.
Is this
because,
happening?
For example,
are our special forces doing this right now?
Well, there are, as Ben Wallace has said in that interview, decision makers are being asked to make decisions which they might not ordinarily make. For example, to call in a drone strike and take lethal action in that way, rather than a surgical action where special forces might go in on the ground. Are you accusing
our special forces now? You use the present tense. Are you accusing them of killing rather than capturing terrorists? Why did you say these words?
I'm defending our armed forces.
I'm defending our armed forces by claiming they engage in extrajudicial killing. That's defending them. What's attacking them? I mean, that sounds like the prosecution. They do war crimes. I'm defending them. Tory leadership candidate Tom Tugendhat sought to distance himself from Jenrick's claims. Tugendhat, who was in the military before entering politics, told Sky News this. I think what he said is wrong, and I'm afraid demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of military operations and the law of armed conflict. I'm extremely concerned that such words should not be seen in any way to encourage people to take any action other than surrender to British forces when asked to do so. Such an important point. After all, that meme goes out there and people believe it. Why on earth would you surrender? You're going to be murdered anyway. According to Robert Jenrick, you're going to be subject to an extrajudicial killing. James Cleverly, who's also in the running for the Tory leadership and is a long-time army reservist, said, quote, our military do not murder people. Beyond the Conservative Party, SAS soldier, or former SAS soldier and novelist Andy McNabb wasn't best pleased either. He said this. He is playing politics to boost his party election prospects, but he doesn't know what he's on about because he's never faced a kill or be killed situation. Stop using the SAS for your own personal gain. When you're being attacked by Andy McNabb, it should be all over in terms of your prospects for winning the Tory party leadership. That said, Robert Jenrick is very much the firm favourite, but the backlash didn't appear to dampen Jenrick's spirits. He offered up this revelation to the Tory party conference.
I guess your daughter knew what was coming, because what's her middle name?
Oh, you're embarrassing her now. It is Margaret Thatcher. It's not, it's Thatcher. It's Thatcher. She was born the year that Margaret Thatcher died. And so, as, you know, I respect strong women. In fact, everyone is female in my house. I've got 3 daughters, my wife, and 2 dogs, which are both female. But I thought it was a good way of reminding her of a great Prime Minister.
Weirdo! You call your daughter Thatcher? Poor girl. She was born when Thatcher died, so how old would she be? Would she be like... She'd be almost, what? She's 10, 11? When did Thatcher die? Mid-2010s? 2014? 2013? She's going to be going to secondary school and she has a middle name, Thatcher. Weirdo! right? I'm on the left. I mean, I might call my kid Karl Marx, right? Or Rosa. Rosa's a nice name, Rosa Luxemburg. It's like calling your kid Lenin. Like nobody else is called Lenin, right? Lots of people are called Karl. You could have called her Margaret. Very strange. And that does seem to be something, doesn't it, with regards to the people running to be the Tory party leader. They're all very strange people. Robert Jenrick isn't the only Conservative leadership candidate courting controversy. Kemi Badenoch is embroiled in yet another row, again, this time on whether the minimum wage is good or not.
There's a cafe in my constituency that closed down, and the lady who owned it said, I can't afford to pay the wages anymore. I can't afford minimum wage. I can't afford for my staff to go on maternity. We are overburdening businesses. We are overburdening them with regulation, with tax. People aren't starting businesses anymore because they're too scared.
Of course, Badenoch spent a great deal of time in recent days telling reporters her comments on maternity pay being, quote, excessive were misrepresented. But she seems to be doubling down on them and throwing the minimum wage into the mix as well. Mike, Kemi Badenoch, Robert Jenrick, they're two of the frontrunners in this leadership campaign alongside Tom Tugendhat. Of course, anything can happen, that's politics. But are they sinking their bids by making these increasingly outlandish statements?
I'm not sure about sinking their bids, because I think the reason they're making these outlandish statements is because in some ways they believe it's going to appeal to the kind of Conservative base, the Conservative membership. And given where the Conservative Party is at the moment, the Conservative Party has lurched further to the right. There is every chance that the idea that we've gone too far on maternity leave and we've gone too far on minimum wage and all of this kind of rhetoric and the European court is soft on terrorists, this rhetoric might in some ways appeal to some Conservative members. And that's a real worry for the Conservative membership and where they are at the moment. I think Jenrick's claims in particular were really, really worrying. And if that's the sort of man that could potentially become Prime Minister at some point, we should all be deeply concerned, because his claim that the kind of implicit claim the European court is soft on terrorists kind of is a misunderstanding of how courts work. You know, the rights of all people need to be respected, including terrorists, right? So the court's there to kind of respect that principle. You can't just go around killing terrorists without them standing some kind of trial of some description. So it's really dangerous that he's kind of endorsing or kind of implicitly endorsing that kind of thing. And a real worry with that kind of man is seeking power and seeking leadership of a major party in the UK. And I think on Badenoch, I think I predicted a few months ago on the show, I think when I was speaking to you, Aaron, actually, but she was going to be the leader of the Conservative Party. And I initially thought that she might be a problem for the Labour Party. And I do still think that she might be, especially on some of the cultural war issues where I think Labour have just like completely avoided them or have a really weak position on them. They haven't got a really strong progressive position on any of them, like especially on issues like migration. Labour are really poor on that. And I thought she might be someone that's able to kind of probe at those issues and kind of, because she isn't quite a Braverman, and that Braverman was like just downright really, 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 really nasty. And I think Badenoch is still nasty in her own way, but not in the kind of almost facile way that Braverman was. I thought that could be a kind of like a way she could prod at Labour. But I think she's actually quite prone to gaffes and just saying really bizarre things that might resonate with the Conservative base. But more broadly, people are looking at you like, what on earth are you saying? Like the maternity leave thing. I mean, even if you're someone who's like quite right wing, I mean, the idea that maternity leave's gone too far and is crippling businesses. I mean, how many people in Britain hold that view beyond a really kind of intense kind of right-wing group of people? Like how many people hold the view that minimum wage has gone too far? You know, when we look at the country and the kind of problems we face, kind of crumbling public services, workers' rights not being respected or upheld enough, I think in many ways we are seeing people sympathetic to more progress on workers' rights, to maybe more progress on maternity leave and paternity leave. So I just think that this is so out of sync with the nation more broadly, and the Conservative membership I also think is so out of sync with where the public are at the moment. It's just like, it feels like they're just in a completely different planet. And just, I honestly think for the next, couple of years, the Conservative Party, whoever takes over the party, are going to be in a bit of a pickle, because I don't think there is any kind of like competent people in that party who are even capable of putting together a cohesive policy platform that isn't going to be full of gaffes and just purely idiotic positions that only appeal to a really small minority of British people.
Yeah, I think that's true. Look, I don't often say that, centrist is the right way to go, but I can't help but feel that if Jeremy Hunt was running, and of course his credibility is enhanced now that inflation has come down. We've got interest rate cuts. The economy is kind of doing okay. I kind of feel if he was running, Labour would be in a bit of trouble because, look, he wouldn't maybe win a majority in the next election, but he could get back some of those Lib Dem seats. And I feel like Labour don't have a core offer. So actually him tacking to the centre would be probably quite dangerous for them. Maybe Tugendhat can do that. I actually think he's a bit of a weirdo as well, frankly. He's the least weird out of all of them, maybe cleverly as well. But the front runners, Badenoch and Jenrick, are genuine weirdos. The maternity leave thing, crazy. And you had Fraser Nelson, of course, formerly employed her at The Spectator, saying she did us a favour. We're just a small business. She didn't have maternity leave. Reminder, The Spectator was recently purchased by Paul Marshall for £100 million. We're just a small company worth £100 million. We can't afford maternity leave. Well, if you can't afford maternity leave, who can? We have a birth rate in this country of about 1.4. And of course, the right increasingly says, that's too low. What can we do? Including The Spectator, what can we do? Of course, weeks later, they say, we can't afford to pay maternity pay. You've answered your own question there. What can we do? You don't want to do anything. Novara Media can exclusively reveal that a Tory MP believes we should look at the pager attacks that recently took place in Lebanon with admiration. Speaking at a Conservative Party conference fringe event in Birmingham, Lincoln Jopp, the new Conservative MP for Spelthorne in Surrey, said this: let's just look at the 1,500 exploding pagers and look on with awe at how little that cost and how effective that was. On the 17th and 18th of September, thousands of pagers and walkie-talkies, some owned by Hezbollah members, exploded in Lebanon and Syria, killing at least 45 people, including 2 children. The attacks, widely believed to have been carried out by Israel, injured thousands more, hundreds of whom have been left with life-altering injuries. When asked about the human rights implications of such attacks by Novara Media, this is how Jopp responded. No one has, I don't think, owned up for it, have they? So we don't even know whether it was a state actor or not, and it raises some really interesting questions about rules of engagement on targeting. Do I have any concerns about it? Yeah, I've got questions about it. Let us say you have a proper targeting strategy and every single one of those 1,500 pages was in the hands of someone you wanted to kill. And let's say 3 kids were playing with them when they went off. That is a phenomenally small amount of collateral damage compared to any other attack that I can think of. I mean, it's just phenomenal. It's just phenomenal. We only killed 3 children. And it would probably meet most Western nations' collateral damage estimate thresholds compared to anything else. We're blowing off people's hands and their eyes, and children, innocent children are dying, but it's phenomenal. Jopp's comments were condemned by the Lebanese ambassador to the UK, the International Centre of Justice for Palestinians, and Amnesty International. Amnesty's head of government affairs, Carla McLaren, said this: the pager attacks were highly indiscriminate, killing and injuring children and medical workers, and no UK politicians should be celebrating them or callously referring to these casualties as, quote, collateral damage. Detonating thousands of devices simultaneously without being able to determine their exact location or whose possession they were in at the time of the attack showed a complete disregard for the right to life and for the laws of armed conflict. All politicians and commentators should be supporting a credible investigation into these attacks as suspected war crimes, not excusing them or applauding them. I mean, here's a question for you guys watching and listening. Imagine that operation had been overseen by the Russians. Imagine hundreds of members of the Ukrainian armed forces had their walkie-talkies, their pagers infiltrated, and dozens of people died, including some kids. Thousands of people were injured. Do you think there'll be a Conservative MP, or dare I say any MP, saying, this is really impressive? Didn't cost very much, did it? We've got something to learn there. I suspect not. I'm sure they would call it reprehensible, terrorism, barbaric, but of course, different countries play by different rules. Mike, where does the Conservative Party find these people?
Honestly, when you read his name out, I was like, is that a real person? Like, it doesn't sound like a real person at all. But honestly, I think, speaking more seriously, this does speak to like what I think is a dehumanization of kind of Muslims and Arab people, where these lives are seen as disposable, like for the, in inverted commas, the greater good. Yeah, we can just kill some children. It's fine. You know, it happens. That's war. That's what happens in war. You know, you have to do this in war. And it's really kind of a real. I think it's something that holds us back from making progress. That people do genuinely, and this is years and years of Islamophobic rhetoric, of rhetoric that's targeted Muslims and presented Muslims as a threat to our stability and a threat to the Britain, etc. Years and years of that rhetoric. This is the result of it. This is how these people are dehumanized and spoken about in such dismissive terms. It's genuinely disgusting.
To read more on this story, head over to novaramedia.com. Like I said, it's a Novara Media exclusive. We're very proud of the stories we get to break, thanks to your kind support. If you want to support our work, that link is in the description below. Mike, thanks for joining me this evening on a bumper show.
Pleasure as always. We did some big stories today, but hope the viewers enjoyed it and the listeners enjoyed it too. We did some big stories. There was lots of news, guys. You've got Tory party conference, you've got Labour in freefall, you've got a war in West Asia, you've got an invasion of Lebanon. Lots to discuss. There's always lots to discuss, it seems. Make sure to join us on tomorrow's stream. That's live from 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.